Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg. I'm the publisher of Orbis Books. I'm very pleased to be joined today by one of my favorite authors. I have to say, we've worked together for over 25 years on 5 books. That's Kelly Brown Douglas. She is the canon theologian of the National Cathedral in Washington. She is also the dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary, where she also received her doctorate many years ago, working with the great James Cone, another one of our beloved authors. Her most recent book, and we'll be talking about that today, is called Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter. And it occurred to me that, Kelly, that in all of your books, you have been, in a way, wrestling with how to reconcile the credibility or the meaning of the gospel in relation to the persistence of suffering, particularly Black suffering in America. And you have said, in a way, that your work represents a kind of ongoing journey, and I think that's very obvious in this book. In your previous book, which I think was really a groundbreaking book, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, that was written after the death of the teenager Trayvon Martin in Florida. And that was an event that also kind of triggered the whole rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And you responded to that, not just as a theologian, but in a very personal way, as the mother of an African-American male teenager. And so now in your new book, this in a way comes after the death of another Black man, George Floyd, and the depth of feeling that evoked. And once again, now you're also responding to now questions posed to you very personally, literally, by your now grown son. So I wonder if you could reflect on the journey that you've been on between those 2 books and where that has led you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Robert. And as you perhaps exaggerated me being one of your favorite authors, but it has certainly over these 25 or more years been more than a privilege to work with you, and now to call you not simply my editor, but my friend. So between the time, and Robert, you know this as well as anybody, between the time of the Stand Your Ground and this current book, Resurrection Hope, I really had no intention of writing this book, Resurrection Hope, and almost like Stand Your Ground, and it was the journey itself and the questions themselves. And one of the things that became very clear, especially when we bracket this really with my son, who was a teenager during the time of Trayvon Martin's death and murder, and the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And now he's a young adult and was like 23 at the time of Philandro Castille's death. And I mark that because it marks one of the discussions and conversations that Desmond and I had. What I realized during this time was not simply how so much had not changed, and it was this ongoing struggle for Black lives to matter, at least for the reality that Black lives did not really matter in this country, to become a part of the collective consciousness and awareness of this country in a different way, but also recognizing the way in which the threat to Black lives seemed to intensify. And so that it didn't seem as though things were getting any better at all. And even recognizing sort of the historical patterns that we see, because of course, during the time of writing Stand Your Ground, we had a Black president.
Mhm.
And then we had gone from there to, well, the MAGA vision and the
Mhm.
man that we had sitting in the Oval Office who represented so much of what I talked about in Stand Your Ground, white supremacy, Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism, etc. And so to recognize during that period of time that not only had things not really gotten better, that these realities intensified as
Mhm.
the country did not come to this more collective awareness of the uh, reality that Black lives didn't matter, this collective awareness of the intensity of white supremacy, et cetera, and the threat that had to Black and brown lives and bodies in this country, but that the country had doubled down
Mhm.
on its founding narrative of white supremacy and Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism and all that goes with it. And in the process, that Black lives in particular were more endangered. And so during that period, as I recognized the intensity and the change, if you will, that had occurred for the worse, not the better, that that became even more acute for me because of the questions that my son was asking as he recognized that. And
Mhm.
so he wasn't willing to continue in this cycle that we found ourselves in, but was asking really the hard question. It's like, okay, what difference does all of this make? We've had Trayvon, we've had Michael Brown, we've had Philandro, we've had Sandra Bland. Now we've got George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Auburn Aubrey,
Mhm.
and we had a Black president, and now we have the Mega Man. And so, you
Mhm.
know, to hear your child frame those questions, it brings a whole new sense of, for me,
Mhm.
responsibility and accountability as a
Mhm.
mother and as a theologian. And his questions really were my questions, and he just dug
Mhm.
them up from the bottom of my soul.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, in Stand Your Ground, you really so persuasively showed how white supremacy was kind of baked into the origins of America and the idea of American exceptionalism, the idea that America is kind of white space and that people of color are outsiders, they're a threat, they're potentially dangerous, they're potentially criminal, and therefore can be targeted with impunity. And so then, as you say, then we go from that to the whole motto of the whole administration with "Make America Great Again," and which you show, so well is a a defense, affirmation of that whole kind of white supremacist ideology.
Yeah, but one thing that I did not in Stand Your Ground fully appreciate and really didn't begin to grow into a deep appreciation of it until after I wrote Stand Your Ground and continued to learn on this journey. But what I didn't completely appreciate, Robert, that I spend more time with in this book is the narrative of anti-Blackness, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And the reality of anti-Blackness is because what I came to realize even more was that it was about more than simply white supremacy, that there was another narrative, if you will, that was inextricably related to this notion of white supremacy. But one can talk about the superiority of whiteness and not feel this almost instinctive response to the Black body.
Mhm.
And what I came to recognize even more intensely during this period between the two books was the way in which people were simply responding to the Black body. And that
Mhm.
probably was a new awareness or different level of awareness for me, but it's been there all along. And so what I really came to appreciate was the intense reality in this country of anti-Blackness, and that when we talk about whether we're talking about white racism, white supremacy, et cetera, we cannot ignore that there is something in particular about the Black body
Mm,
that is viewed as an instinctive threat in this country, and that the Black body itself is under siege,
mm,
under threat. And so that this reality of racism, white supremacy, that as we talk about that, we can't talk about it simply in these general terms, but we have to recognize the anti-Blackness that is also baked in to this country. And that's what I explore deeply
mhm,
in this book. And it also is that really which helps us to understand more deeply why it is important to be able to affirm that Black lives matter,
mm,
because this is a response to an anti-Black narrative in this country. It is not simply a response to, let's say, white supremacy. And so for
mhm,
people only to be able to say, oh, well, yes, all lives matter, what that suggests is that you don't have the ability to say that Black lives in particular matter, or that Black life can represent or signal or symbolize all of humanity. And
mm,
the reason we can't do that is because we have not come to grips with the reality of anti-Blackness that is
mm,
baked in not only into our social, cultural, political environment, but also our theological
mm.
environment.
There are a couple of ideas I want, if you could talk about a little bit more. You write a lot about a kind of white way of knowing that infects the culture and the Christian church and in many different ways. And also then the problematic role of what you call good white Christians.
Mm, mm.
Want to say a little about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, two things, and I'll try to be briefer in my responses. The other thing, when you talk about the white way of knowing, that I also didn't fully appreciate sort of my journey
Mhm,
and understanding where we are, and didn't fully appreciate, say, in Stand Your Ground, is that we talk about the legacy, if you will, of slavery, and I like to say the legacy of white supremacy. We talk about that legacy in terms of its sort of social, political realities, right? Economic realities, etc.
mhm,
But we don't talk about it in relationship, if you will, to its epistemological realities, this legacy that is a way of knowing, this legacy that has caused us not only to define knowledge in a certain way, and hence what it is valuable to know, what counts as truth, what counts as knowledge,
mhm,
but has also shaped the way we see the world, the way we engage history, the way we engage experience, and the way in which we determine what's important
mhm,
to know.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so this is a gaze, really,
mhm,
that has shaped, for lack of a better way of saying it, as I say, our way of knowing
mhm,
in
mhm,
our way of perceiving. And so that's what I really again came to appreciate and to try to sort of unravel and uncover. And that gaze, that white way of knowing has
mhm,
held us, if you will, hostage. And
mhm,
it has shaped the way we imagine
mhm,
justice and the way we enact justice,
mhm,
and the way in which injustice has emerged, and it's sort of trapped us in this sort of
mhm,
prism
mhm,
of cognition and of experience and of perception. And
mhm,
so it's not surprising, for instance, that we have seen such a resistance to quote unquote critical race theory, which many people who resist it don't know what it's
mhm,
about.
yeah, of course.
But it's not surprising that we have seen a resistance to that, because what critical race theory is really trying to help us to do is to break free from this limited white way of knowing and
Mhm.
opening up
Mhm.
our way of knowing, seeing, and perceiving the world. Uh, in terms of good white Christians,
Mhm.
you know, we focus a lot on those very vocal, forthright, unapologetic, if you will, persons who support, sustain, wittingly and unwittingly, white supremacist narratives.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I always use as an example, as we know, the PRRI, Public Religion and Research Institute, revealed after the 2016 election that, as well as Pew Studies, revealed that over 80 some percent of white evangelicals supported the Make America Great Again vision and its candidate.
Mhm.
People expected that, but what we've tended to ignore is that so too did over 50% of non-evangelical
Mhm.
white Christians,
Mhm.
and so too did almost 60% of white Catholics,
Mhm.
which means that the majority of white Christian America supported the Make America Great Again vision and its candidate.
Mhm.
And those, all that majority aren't these people that we would find
Mhm.
carrying forth the white Christian nationalist
Mhm.
banner
Mhm.
during the insurrection last year on Capitol Hill. We are talking about quote unquote good white Christians. These Christians who white Christians who ordinarily would be in support of social justice kind of realities, and they are,
Mhm.
and that would not consider themselves racist. But what is it? What
Mhm.
is it that has allowed them, particularly when it comes to these issues of anti-Blackness and race matters, to not be as all in as we might expect them or want them to be? And it's not because of, it seems to me, this reality of sort of being a proclaimed racist or
Mhm.
not being aware of
Mhm.
uh, uh, sort of the anti-Blackness and white supremacy, and not being and being unwilling to discuss it or engage in the difficult conversations about something else. And that's where this white gaze becomes
Mhm.
very important, and it shapes the way in which good white Christians sort of live out and into their faith. And so somehow we have to unravel that, call them to
Mhm.
account.
Mhm.
And I try to do that in this book in concrete ways, and point to the ways in which good white Christians' whiteness has limited their understanding of really the incarnational radicality of God's love as it comes to us through a Jesus who was crucified.
Well, that leads into something I wanted to discuss, which is sort of the second part of the book, which is a little more theological and also a little bit more personal, because it reflects, a kind of personal journey of faith and wrestling with doubt, and these kind of questions for yourself about what is the credibility of of the gospel. If it's if it lends itself in some way or through over Christian history to be distorted or corrupted in this kind of way, and raising very personal questions for yourself prompted some, as you said, your son was asking questions that you were putting to yourself, but you do end on a note of resurrection hope. Could you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, and let's hope that it's not simply a naive hope, right?
Uh-huh.
But yeah, the point of the matter is we do have a crucified Savior at the center of our faith, and I have often said that we have to take that seriously. And in taking that seriously, I have often said as well and wrote about extensively in Stand Your Ground that that means we have to see this crucified Savior in the face of a George Floyd,
Mhm.
Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, that what we're talking about are 21st century crucifixions.
Mhm.
What I came to really understand, or the conflict, the tension even more, was okay, but is this not a way of saying that we have to sacrifice Black life if we're going to get to a point of justice where Black life does matter in this country? Are we calling for the sacrificial death of Black life? Are we getting used, as Patricia Kohlers, of one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, said, are we getting too used to Black death in this country? And is that what the crucifixion calls us to, this point of a sacrificial victim? And I had focused a lot on that, but trying never to talk about the Black life, or that there was power in the blood, if you will. But I recognized that indeed I was kind of trapped in that, and we can, and if we look at the way in which George Floyd's really 21st century lynching gave way to all of these Black Lives Matter protests across the country, we can suggest that his death was a catalyst for that. And I didn't want to get stuck in that model.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was, Robert, really the tension for me. And where do you really go from here? And we find ourselves still in this reality of Black death. When's the resurrection? To where's justice? As my son said, okay, it's all well and good that Christ is Black, but what difference does that make for us right now? What difference is it making for us? And so I had to find my way through that, and really did not know where I was going to end up with that. And that was the scary part of this journey for me.
Mhm.
And you traveled some of this journey through the book with me, and I got lost in it. And some places trying to really figure out uh, not simply who I was as a theologian, but how I was going to get my way through the cross. Because I think ultimately that's what we have to navigate as Christians, is the cross, and how I was going to get my way through the cross. And it took more than sort of thinking my way through it in my head at one point, which I tried to do, and you pulled me out of my head, and that it was more than this abstract journey in my head, that I had to live into my own experience and journey of faith, my own experience of the cross. And was I able to move in my own realities as a Black person, as a Black mother, through the reality of the cross, calling us in some ways into this time of death and crucifixion. And as I put forth in the book, my only way out of it was to find, and I literally prayed about this, and literally was reminded of the story of Jesus calling the disciples as they were stuck in their crucifying realities, calling them back to Galilee. And I literally had to find my Galilee. And that Galilee was in the Black Lives Matter protests. And I went down, put on my little mask, and went down to Black Lives Matter Plaza, not knowing, not expecting anything, just being there. And it was in that moment that the reality of the resurrection became real for me, as people were continuing to resist the realities of the cross. And for me now, it's not a matter. I think now in this moment, in this conversation of Martin Luther King saying, I may not get there with you, uh, but I know we're going to get to the promised land. And that's, it's just in this conversation that actually that came to me, and to recognize even more intensely what he was saying. May not get there with you. I may not see it, but I know we're going to get there. And that's what I had to come to, that, you know what? I may see more George Floyd's, I hope not. We may not get there in my lifetime, but that doesn't mean I don't continue to fight and live into it, into this, and not to give in. If I believed and gave in and gave up, to me that's giving into the cross. And so that, a lot of that came to me in that moment of being at Black Lives Matter Plaza and seeing people who really, really, really believed that the fight for Black lives to matter mattered. And that it would make a difference. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been out there risking their lives in the middle of the pandemic to fight for Black lives to matter. And that came to me. And as you know, I was reminded in that moment as of that which I'm always reminded of, and in a personal way, of the folks who were my ancestors who were enslaved, and they fought for freedom even though they knew they would not get there with us, right? And they fought for freedom anyhow, even when they knew that they would never breathe a free breath. And they continued to risk their lives for freedom. And because they did that, I am sitting here talking to you with the freedom to write a book. And they would have never imagined that. My grandmother would have never imagined that. She could, I wish that I had my grandmother in front of me now, and she looking at her granddaughter who with a PhD, and she just wanted us to finish high school. Could have never imagined that. And so that to me is, that became real for me as I tried to make my way through the cross to the resurrection. And resurrection realities that we, as we live them, isn't about perfection and getting to that perfect place of God's justice, but it is about never giving up and keeping that promise of God's justice alive.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly. It has been a privilege, an honor to accompany you on this journey. I've learned so much from you, and I always draw so much inspiration from you. So everyone, I hope will seek out this book, Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter, and find Kelly Brown Douglas's other books also on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.